Hello everyone, today welcome back to HS English, and today we'll be looking at the character of Crooks and completing another essay plan. And don't forget, of course, to like and subscribe so we can continue doing lots of essay plans regarding hopefully every character in the book and maybe lots of different themes as well. So without further ado, the first thing I think before I even start looking at Crooks is to understand, or at least tell you that I think the key thing with On Mice and Men is there's two kind of assessment objectives that attempted to be examined. The first one being assessment objective one, which is the kind of the normal just description of the book, adding the quotes, adding the quotes in the book. But the key thing that I want to really look at is assessment objective four, which is that you need to have a certain sense of historical kind of aspect within each essay. Whether you're referring to something from, for example, the time of the Great Depression, when the book was written, but there must be some form of historical context within each character, and this is, of course, what we're going to have a look at today. So, when it comes to Crooks, the first paragraph we're going to look at is how Crooks experiences loneliness. He's isolated and he longs for a friendship. For example, the quote here from Crooks is, "A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody," clearly showing that he longs for friendship. And the key thing with Crooks is that he's the only coloured man on the ranch, therefore he has to deal with multiple racial prejudices. And for example, not being allowed into the bunkhouse, and of course he tries to combat his loneliness with books, as seen, for example, by the description of his room, and even how he's very self-defensive when he says, "You got no right to be here." I've just highlighted there when Lenny comes on the outside of his room. And eventually he allows Lenny to set, and he also almost opens up a little bit because Crooks says to Lenny, it doesn't make no difference who the guy is as long as he's with you. Again, showing Crooks' desire just to get a friendship, because Crooks really, all he has is his room. Of course, he's very proud of it, but he really does long for a friend. And he has to deal, in terms of the AF4, the historical context I was talking about, with, of course, Jim Crow laws, which was a way of segregating whites and blacks. At the time, of course, the Great Depression, that still hadn't been abolished, really. The privileges weren't the same until at least the 1960s, and black people had to, sadly, suffer from race riots, and often into the time of the Great Depression, when lots of jobs were taken, it was often coloured people whose jobs be lost first, before white people. And this is something that Crooks had to deal with, and hence Crooks, for example, was really almost wanting to join that kind of farm project that George and almost the American dream that George and Lenny had. So moving on, we can look at Crooks having the least authority, and the key thing is that Crooks is clearly at the bottom of the ranch hierarchy, openly called out, and even Curly's wife is able to wield authority above Crooks. For example, seeing how defenseless Crooks is. So because Curly's wife, a quote here says to Crooks, is, "I could get you strung up on a tree so easily it ain't even funny." And again, it just it almost adds that loneliness sense, because Crooks, A, he has no one, and B, he's the lowest in the social hierarchy of the ranch, clearly showing that Crooks has to go through a really, really difficult life. And again, Steinbeck, through Crooks, portrays what it's like for coloured people during the Great Depression. And it shows that even despite, for example, despite Crooks being proud and aloof, he has to sadly shrink into a terrible protective dignity that almost is associated with Crooks, I think, throughout the novel by Steinbeck. And he's often described as a rat throughout as well. That kind of low level of authority that he almost achieves throughout the book is constantly, constantly repeated by Steinbeck, and he's done that simply to clearly show to the readers that the coloured people, they really, really suffered, sadly, during the Great Depression. And the only opportunity really is to exert authority actually is when he meets Lenny, and hence he relishes it. He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? And again, if you want to tie in a bit of AO4, a bit of historical context, you can look at the fact lynching, which is very common, being strung up on a tree, as Curly's wife said, for coloured people. And in fact, it took till the 1960s and the work, for example, people like Martin Luther King Jr., just to get the rights of coloured people, on the trajectory to being respected. And that is one sad aspect and sad reality of when it comes to the character Crooks, or in just colored people in general during the Great Depression. And paragraph 3 is again looking at Crooks's room, almost building on the kind of prejudice that he has to receive, his kind of low place in society, and more of his description. And you can look at Crooks's room with the only place really where he finds solace, but also a means of keeping himself isolated from other ranch workers simply as defensive measure. And his room contains treasured possessions. He has many books, for example, like a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905, indicating that Crooks knows his rights and almost he has to know his rights because of the kind of prejudice, as we've just been described, that colored people suffered during the Great Depression. And he also has a pair of gold rimmed spectacles and even a tattered dictionary, indicating that he's actually well educated. And the problem is, though, is simply racial prejudices combined with the fallout after the Great Depression and the complete upending of American economy means that he doesn't have the opportunity to succeed in life, especially because Crooks, for example, himself is seen as a proud and aloof man. He's got so much potential. He used to have friends. His old man had a chicken ranch story in California, and sadly, though, the prejudice at the time, the racism that Crooks had to experience, as described by Steinbeck, means that he's unable, to achieve a high position in society and is right at the bottom of the social hierarchy when it comes to the ranch. And, this kind of desperation by Crooks is seen by his willingness to join George, Candy, and Lenny when it comes to their American dream. It was embedded, again, this kind of American dream being embedded in everyone's heart. It's not matter your skin color. It was just a belief that, you could finally be a free man and in control of your own, your own patch of land, your own, no one to control you. It wasn't something foreign, to a certain group of people. This was for all Americans, and it's seen here by Crooks' willingness to join George and Candy and Lenny when they were trying to purchase their farm. So yeah, that's the character of Crooks. Thank you for listening, and as you can see, I have a Candy video planned for next time, so feel free to like and subscribe so we can see this next time. Thank you.